Welcome once again to the Influencers Podcast. We are here to see the influence of your life grow, that you have been equipped by your Father to be a victor. Hi, my friend Scott Young here with the Influencers Podcast. We are here to see the influence of your life grow, to bring change, positive change to the world we live in. Our co-host Dave Donaldson is out on assignment. Always keep our dear friend in prayer. And today we are going to have a marvelous conversation. You know, Jesus said so many important things, but one of the beautiful things he said was, let not your heart be troubled. He said, I'll give you a peace that the world doesn't understand and a peace the world can't give. Today's conversation will help your soul find peace in this anxiety-ridden world. In fact, let me just ask, how's your soul doing? Is it filled with confusion and chaos? Well, our guest today has been there, and she's learned some truth about overcoming. Tessa Afshar is an award-winning author. Her book, The Way Home, God's Invitation to a New Beginning, actually won the Christian Book of the Year in the Bible study category. She is a wonderful wife. She says mediocre gardener. I don't know what that means, but she loves to cook biblical recipes. And Tessa, we're glad you've joined us today on the Influencers Podcast. Let me ask you, what does it mean to be an average gardener?
Well, first of all, it's a joy to be with you, Scott. I wish I were an average gardener. I think I'm a little lower than that. I'm more of a mediocre gardener. That means some things die and some things don't come back, and some things grow, but you know, they might give you bellyache when you eat them. But generally speaking, we have some success. We have a lot of fun.
Where do you find biblical recipes to cook? I guess in the Bible.
No, the Bible doesn't give us recipes, actually. It does give us a list of the contents that you might be able to use. So we do know in Old Testament times what some of the ingredients might have been. We also have recipes that have survived from Babylon, say, and from Rome. So from New Testament times, like when Paul would travel, let's say, to Philippi, what would he eat? We have a fairly good idea. So I kind of like to try some of those old recipes, but I try to make them for people like in modern day who don't have all that much time and they can't go and make a fire, you know. So how do you kind of upgrade it to modern times, but get a little taste of biblical times?
So is your love for Middle Eastern food because you were raised in the Middle East?
I think so. Yeah, absolutely. I spent the first almost 14 years of my life in the Middle East, and the food becomes just such a part of culture. It's a huge part of life, daily life. And you just, I obviously, I love Middle Eastern food, but I think most people do when they try it.
And the show notes I have said you were raised in a nominal Muslim family, and describe what a nominal Muslim family is and maybe your journey of faith through your life.
Scott, I think nominal Muslims have a lot in common with nominal Christians. So my family, there was definitely a Muslim worldview in some ways, but my father was a physician and none of us prayed 5 times a day. My mother didn't wear the hijab. And so we didn't live up to those 5 pillars of Islam. When I say that, I think that we had some Muslim worldview. Like the Muslim worldview is very much one of everything is what you do. There's very little gray. So even at the end of your life, there is a scale, and literally your good actions go on one side, your bad behaviors go on the other, and whichever is heavier, that sort of decides your destiny. There's no sense of the grace of God. And so I think that definitely had its influence in our lives, in the sense that I grew up with a feeling that it was all up to me. We weren't into religion. I grew up believing that all religions were the same. I didn't understand that there was a difference about Jesus. But I sort of felt like life was up to me. Like if I was going to succeed, and I think by success, I meant be a generally good person and be happy, and accomplish good things. that was all up to me. If I was good enough, if I worked hard enough, if I was nice enough or kind enough or pretty enough or whatever enough, that I would be able to achieve that ideal of what I understood as success. And of course, life taught me that that's not how it works. When I was 13, my parents got divorced. And so my mom, my sister, and I moved to England, where I started attending boarding school for girls. And while I was at boarding school, so this was a huge loss. I have to say at this point, insert, my father remained in our country because he was still practicing medicine. And so that huge loss of my home, my friends, my school, my language, my extended family, which is very important in the Middle East, and my father, as well as my food. I think it was a tremendous sort of broken place in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And when I was at the boarding school on Sundays, we had to go to church. So this is not a Christian school. It was just part of tradition, and English boarding school is, very traditional. Mm-hmm. So those of us who are from a different faith background were told, you can go sit upstairs in the balcony and read your own books of faith. For me, that would have been the Quran. Mm-hmm. Well, I didn't speak Arabic. And the Quran, if there's to be any sort of efficacious part to it in terms of studying it, you have to read it in the original Arabic. Mm-hmm. So a translation just won't do. And also, it's really not part of one of the pillars of Islam. It's so different from Christianity. For us, we're like, what's the language of your heart? Let's go and translate it so that the words of God will really touch mm-hmm. your heart in that deep place. But the Quran has to be in the Arabic. So I was like, well, I can't read the Quran. What am I going to do? What am I going to go sit upstairs in the balcony? And I was too shy to explain all this to my teachers. So I used to sneak romance novels under my uniform. And I would sit upstairs and I'd read romance novels. So all that to say, I learned some things about love. I'm not sure that's what Jesus had in mind. But I never heard the gospel. I didn't become a Christian. And my sister, years later, she was required to sit downstairs, and she said she never heard the gospel either, because that's the way with some churches, isn't it? And so I didn't become a Christian. When I was in my early 20s, I fell in love when I was 19, and when I was 21, I married. And again, this is before knowing Jesus, before bringing all of that woundedness with me into mm-hmm. this marriage. He brought his wounds with him. But I had one thing. I had made a commitment to God when my parents got divorced, because it hurt me so much. I'd said, even if I marry the devil himself, I will never get a divorce. And wow. You have to be really careful, don't you, of when making these kinds of vows. They have a power. Mm-hmm. So it was unfortunately a few years into that marriage, my husband wanted out. And that was the first time in my life where I realized I am in this utterly helpless place. There's mm-hmm. nothing I can do to change his mind. Mm-hmm. And so I went through just this deep sense of loss, of brokenness. And I was looking for answers. I was looking for this place where someone would tell me, this is how you're going to make it right. This is how you're going to have hope for your future. This would have been a good time to be in a Bible study. This would have been a good time to read, but nobody was sharing the gospel with me. And I think, Scott, it's because we're very careful not to offend people, aren't we? Nobody wanted to offend me as someone from a different faith background, and no one shared the gospel with me. So at that time, when I was going through this deep, almost depression, I had a dream of Jesus. And in that dream, I was by the Sea of Galilee, and I knew that everybody who was there, they were followers of Jesus. And I was sort of standing by myself. And in the dream, I saw a man walking toward me from the distance. And I knew that man was Jesus. So I was curious to see him. Now, you have to remember what I'm about to tell you. It's very embarrassing, but it's very honest. Mm-hmm. My only exposure to Jesus at this point had been through a couple of movies that I used to watch when I was a kid during Easter and Christmas. So my expectation of Jesus was that was Jesus, right?
Yeah.
So the man who walked toward me, when I saw him, my first response to him, my first reaction was disappointment, because the Jesus in my dream was really homely. And the Jesus that I had been exposed to had been like really good looking. He was, Hollywood actor and all of that. And I was like, that's Jesus? Like, that's the son of God. Like, God couldn't do any better for his son. But in a few seconds, Jesus came close enough for me to see his face. And I saw his eyes. And even in the dream, in those eyes, I saw the kind of love that I had never experienced in my life. And I saw the fullness of power that put the stars in their place, that holds the world in his hand, that names every star by name and knows the number of hair on my head. That combination of love and power was something that we will never experience on this earth until we see Jesus face to face. And it brought me almost to my knees, because in that moment, I felt known, loved, accepted in a way that was, and I grew up in a loving family, but I had never experienced that in my life. So Jesus just motioned to me to say, follow me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think looking in those eyes, I would have followed him anywhere. And he was asking me to follow him into a boat, but he was also asking me to follow him for the rest of my life. And I knew that.
So you were about how old at this stage of your life?
I was 25 when I had the dream.
Yeah, and you've recently written the book, The Rested Soul. At that mid-20s, were you still battling anxiety, overstressed? Talk about that journey that this book is based on.
So that was my journey to becoming a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So at that point, I was going through this depression because of the divorce, because of the loss.
Yeah.
But I didn't really understand anxiety. I don't think that I really had experienced anxiety until after I became a Christian.
Okay.
And I had been a Christian for about 20 years. So, so that was, when I became a Christian, and it wasn't because of the dream. The dream, I woke up, I had 3 days of unshakable peace, but I still wasn't a Christian because I didn't understand I had to receive Jesus. At that point, God suddenly surrounded me with people of faith who finally invited me to church and to Bible study, gave me a Bible, started experiencing. And, I still didn't think that they knew what they were talking about. I just knew there was something special about them. Mm-hmm. I kept asking them, like, what is it about you? Like, for example, this couple who kept inviting me to their home and feeding me and treated me like a daughter. I looked at their marriage and I was like, your marriage should have fallen apart. You're so different. Why do you have a happy marriage? Why are you so in love? Like, my parents had more in common than you have.
Yeah.
But why are you so in love? And they kept saying, but Jesus. Our marriage is Jesus. Everything pointed to Jesus. And finally I was thinking, well, 99%, I'm right, they're wrong. Like, all religions are the same. But 1%, what if this Jesus really is as different as they say? And that's all I always say. Jesus just needed my 0.1%. Like, that's what he needed, my permission to come in and to show himself. And that's when I fell in love with Jesus. Really, I think the dream broke some kind of stronghold that was over my life, maybe from my background. But the walk to Jesus was just a quiet falling in love with him as I hung out with the people who loved him too.
So you've written this book. Was it based because you started this faith life with Jesus? Some 2 decades later, you end up in anxiety. Is that the reason for the book you've written?
Yeah. So the Rested Soul is about 20 years into my walk with Jesus. At that point,